Sexual assault in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We need to talk about it.
Why it's so possible, why it's so devastating, and what we as a jiu-jitsu community can do to defend against
Now,
it.
we've spoken about this before publicly, and based on the recent allegations that have surfaced surrounding a very well-known black belt in Florida and the sexual assault of a minor, it's clear that we have to talk about this again.
So here we are. First, let's talk about what jiu-jitsu is actually selling and who it's selling it to. Jiu-jitsu sells empowerment, physical empowerment. So naturally, it's going to sell it to people who feel some sense of vulnerability and who are seeking power or empowerment. So they show up to class, and then we actually deliver on that promise.
They learn some techniques right away. They're like, oh my gosh, all the most worst case scenarios I could imagine, I'm getting solutions to from this instructor. And instantly they hold that instructor in so high regard, right? The trust, the admiration, because the techniques are undeniably effective. So they give that instructor the same level of trust and admiration that they would like to give the techniques, but you can't thank an inanimate technique. So you thank the person that delivered it to you.
And ultimately, trust and admiration is power.
There you
go. So right away, the jiu-jitsu instructor, by teaching jiu-jitsu, establishes power amongst their students.
There you go. And the power is granted to the instructor regardless of their moral fabric. If you're an amazing instructor leading the community in a positive direction, great that you have that power. But if you're a corrupt character, you also have that power, and it can be used for abuse, as we saw in this case in Florida.
So what they actually sought out, they're essentially receiving the opposite of that, disempowerment.
And that makes it the most abusive form of false advertising, which is why it's so hurtful when it happens in jiu-jitsu. And it happens in other industries, but in jiu-jitsu, where we're specifically attracting for empowerment, to give the opposite, it's hard to stomach how sad this is.
So what can we do as a jiu-jitsu community? Let's start by talking to the instructors, because the instructors are essentially the leaders of the jiu-jitsu community. What can instructors do preemptively? We can't always prevent everything from happening, but what preemptive measures can we put into place?
Background checks, right? No one should be teaching jiu-jitsu without a background check. But because jiu-jitsu is so unregulated, anyone can open a school without a background check, and you can have a potential person with a felony conviction that is actually teaching men, women, and children personal empowerment, and that creates a recipe for disaster, especially if it's a violent crime that they committed or a sexual assault or something of that nature. So background checks should be universal in jiu-jitsu. The problem is there's no regulating body. So we do background checks for all of our instructors in-house and for every instructor that we certify at every certified training center around the world. Now, in addition to background checks for instructors, we cross-reference every student who comes in the door on the National Sex Offender Registry. So now we can verify that we are not bringing people in who are known sex offenders and having them interact with students on the mat. That should be impossible. That equation should be impossible, and we do everything we can to defend against it. But we recognize that that really only is a snapshot in time, right? Background checks only give you the past. It doesn't ensure or guarantee a defense against future potential crimes on the mat.
And that's why training is so important. Whether it's sexual harassment training or training to identify when these behaviors occur, what they might look like, and then how to address them.
So important, you guys. And we also have to speak about the culture at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools, because so many schools, the culture is survival of the fittest. Only the strong survive. Jiu-Jitsu is not for everyone. You gotta weather the storm here, and if you survive, you can hang with us, right? It creates this food chain mentality in Jiu-Jitsu, where if you're a higher rank, you're superior, and the lower rank, they're your subordinate. And that happens in Jiu-Jitsu when you're sparring and abusing them on the mat, and they're like there, and they're just grappling dummies for the first however many years of their journey. And ultimately what that culture teaches in Jiu-Jitsu is the silencing of discomfort. That's a concern with that culture. Now, every school gets to choose their own culture, 100%. But the concern with that culture, besides that it's unpleasant for a lot of people who probably need Jiu-Jitsu but can't survive at your school, besides that, the concern with that culture is it silences discomfort. And then at some point, a student who's experiencing abuse in that environment has trouble differentiating. Is this abuse, discomfort that I'm feeling, the natural discomfort of being in this school, or is it separate and a criminal abuse that's happening? Sometimes they have trouble distinguishing between the two because discomfort simply is silence on your mat.
So the question is, what can we do to create a culture that actually empowers and encourages people to speak up when they feel discomfort?
There you go. And this is what we do here at Gracie University and at so many schools around the world from day one in a beginner class. It's not, hey, you white belt, you fight, go. What do I do, coach? Just don't tap out. And then the more talented one beats the younger one, and now the pecking order begins on day one. That's not it. That's not what we should do. It's not what we do. What we do is beginners come in, they're not sparring, trying to kill each other in the beginner program. For the first several months, they're simply working together. And what this teaches them is that we say, okay, if you're a 4-stripe white belt, you're going with this no stripe or a 1-striper, and they pair up and they work together. And the advanced student in that context helps the newer student. They teach them, they guide them, they answer their questions, they're working together. And then they're building them. So from day one, it is taught to students that the more advanced students are there to serve, build, and protect the newer students.
And those students are getting praised for that action.
Hey, great job helping that newer student, that collaboration.
We are praising our students who are helping others, not necessarily praising the person who's tapping everybody out on the floor.
There you go.
So what you praise, that is going to steer the direction of the school, of how your students interact with one another.
They'll eventually graduate from the beginner program, right, where they're helping each other in their building. But it's been several months at this point where they've developed this understanding of the culture. And when they go into the master cycle, and now they're sparring more intensely, and they're getting the full experience of jiu-jitsu, which is to get choked against your will. Like, you're going to get tapped, you're going to get beat.
There will be some discomfort.
There is discomfort. We accept that. But here's the beauty. That discomfort exists on a foundational culture of higher students helping, supporting, and building the lower students. This is what is taught and what is communicated so clearly in Gracie Combatives, and then naturally translates and kind of permeates the master cycle. So if that's what you learned as a beginner, you just carry that on for the rest of your jiu-jitsu journey. And the beauty of all of this is if someone is very uncomfortable, beyond simply losing in a sparring match, that's okay, but uncomfortable in a significant way, whether it be with jiu-jitsu or with something unrelated, like a sexual assault that's happening amongst the community there, they're more likely to speak up because the students know that we are there for them. And when I say them, I mean the weak, the unathletic, the small, the people who are not the hammers, the ones who are the nails in many of the sparring matches. They know we care about them because of how we set up the structure of our school. That is priceless, because that's how we know that a student who's being abused or harassed in a sexual context, potentially by another student, as we see in this incident here in Florida, they're more likely to speak up. And that's all we want, is that the channel and the culture permits communicating discomfort when it happens.
So next, let's talk about what happens when they do speak up. Because if you are an instructor at a jiu-jitsu school, you 100% will experience somebody experiencing something inappropriate, experiencing something that made them feel uncomfortable, and they will or may voice that to you. And every single instructor who teaches jiu-jitsu, this will happen, because guess what? Humans train jiu-jitsu, and humans make mistakes. Humans are complex. So when this happens, when somebody voices their discomfort, the question is, what happens? And this determines everything about the culture of your school, which direction it goes, this moment.
Because it sends a message.
It sends a message. So when someone comes to you and says they experienced something inappropriate or something that made them feel uncomfortable, are you ready for a hard talk?
Yes, and I tell all of our instructors that we certify all over the world. Everything you want out of an amazing school that services the community and growing student base and the maximum possible impact as a jiu-jitsu instructor is on the other side of the hard talks. I've seen it time and time again. For the leaders, for the head instructors who are reluctant to have the hard talks, they never reach their full potential. And for those leaders who have extreme ownership of their school and take full accountability, there truly is no limit. Now the challenge is sometimes that hard talk is with one of your favorite students or an instructor at your school. And you have to talk to them or get rid of them or report them to authorities for a crime they committed. And if you're not willing to do that, you're gonna pay the price. Your school's gonna pay the price, your culture's gonna pay the price.
Your students may pay the price.
So what I tell instructors all the time, it's very simple. You have to accept what everything is being weighed against, right? And terminating a single student to preserve the culture and the understanding in the entire student base that this type of behavior is not permitted in your school. It's worth it. It's worth it. Don't worry about the one. Worry about the whole, the entire community there, and it's absolutely worth it.
And if
you have to have the hard talks.
If you're not ready for this leadership responsibility, this weight,
heavy,
then you are not ready to lead a jiu-jitsu school.
There you go. So hard talks. Are you ready? Are you willing? When the information comes up and you become aware of inappropriate behavior, are you ready, willing, and able to have the hard talks when they're necessary?
Now let's talk to the students. As a student, you likely fall into one of two categories. Either you have witnessed inappropriate behavior, or you have experienced yourself this type of misconduct or violation.
There you go. Let's talk about the witnesses first, right? If you're a witness, you see something inappropriate happen. Do you speak up or do you not speak up? Why wouldn't you speak up? Naturally, because of the power play, especially at a school where it's, survival of the fittest and there's that hierarchical approach and the food chain mentality, you're like, man, I don't want to speak up against that other student or that instructor because I'm just a subordinate blue belt with one stripe. I don't want to say anything. Here's what I'm here to tell you. We need you to speak up. And when I say we, the owners who care about the culture and the good leaders in jiu-jitsu need to know this information.
And when I say we, I mean the people who've experienced it also need you to speak up on their behalf.
There you go. Yes. Even if the target of that abuse did not speak up, you as a witness can say something to the owner. And I'm telling you, we appreciate it because we don't always know what's going on in our schools, and you allow us to, or help us put a potential perpetrator or a person, an inappropriate behaving person, on the radar, right? So now we know what to watch out for, and depending on what the severity of the crime or the behavior was, right, whether we take action right now or at a later time, but at least we're aware of what's going on our mat. And to the extent that you care about the culture of the school, you will speak up, and you can do so in confidence with the instructor or with another member of the staff, speaking up, helping us out. We absolutely appreciate it if, in fact, we care about the culture of our school.
And unfortunately, your voice as a witness will likely be believed over the voice of the person who actually experienced it, especially in a school with this type of culture. So you speaking up does matter, and it does make an impact.
Now let's talk to the students who've actually experienced this harassment or abuse themselves.
First of all, we're sorry you've experienced this. This is not normal. You did not deserve that. And you deserve to train at a safe environment with safe training partners and safe instructors. We encourage you to use your voice and speak up, whether it's to another training partner, whether it's to an instructor or somebody else in the organization. This cannot be addressed if they don't know it's happening.
Now, it's possible that the reluctance to speak up comes from the conditioning that happens at the school, particularly in a school where it's this tough guy, survival of the fittest mentality, and what's taught is silencing of discomfort. Hey, suck it up. Just kind of roll with the punches here, right? And if that's being taught and that's the kind of the pervasive culture of the school, one could easily say, man, we silence our discomfort from jiu-jitsu perspective. So now this sexual harassment is taking place. It's uncomfortable, but I guess I should just be silent. And what we're telling you is no, those two should not be confused or conflated. And absolutely, even if you're at a school where silencing discomfort from a jiu-jitsu perspective is the culture, it doesn't mean that you should silence your discomfort for any inappropriate behavior, harassment, or assault that is being directed towards you.
And if you are feeling discomfort, that is valid. Feelings are valid. So if you felt a certain way, that is truth. That is your truth. And it's often easy to feel like you might be the one who's crazy or who's misunderstood. But no, you deserve to feel safe. You deserve to be heard. So if you speak up and are silenced or are not listened to at your school, we encourage you to seek another training environment. There are safe training environments out there, and it may be time for you to look for another one.
The school owner or head instructor who does not ensure your safety doesn't deserve you as a student. You deserve to be heard, and they don't deserve to have you on their mat if they don't take steps, especially when notified of things that they can do to increase your safety and the safety for other students in a case like this. We have to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is entirely unregulated as an industry. And what that means is we are self-regulating. It's up to us to regulate ourselves. Instructors, we've given certain kind of action steps and things you can do to reduce the likelihood of assaults and sexual harassment of any kind from happening on your mat. We can't prevent it, but we can reduce it. And how effectively you administer these kind of defensive measures will determine the success that you have on your own mat. And these are many of the strategies that we use here at Gracie University headquarters and at certified training centers all over the world. But we know that Gracie University and its schools are just a drop in the bucket. So we made this video today as kind of a public service video for Jiu-Jitsu so that other schools that either have or have not experienced these challenges up until this point have a little more guidance on how to navigate this when it inevitably happens. Right? Because you put people together, they're grappling, they're learning, they're overpowering one another, they're defeating one another, there's a culture in the school, and invariably some human will make a mistake and behave in a way that's inappropriate towards someone else. Could be of sexual nature, could be of a different nature. So we all have a role to play here. Instructors, affiliate leaders, students at every level, we can all have a great impact on the culture within our schools in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. And now more than ever, we need to speak up. Thanks for joining us, you guys. We hope this was of help. We'll see you in the next one.